What an introduction. I've never felt so young with so much music. Hey, Matt, how you doing? Nick?
Good.
How's it going?
Welcome.
Right, so,
not too bad.
Good.
Looks like you're in the real world, Lewis. How's that working out?
Oh no, it's green screen technology has gone crazy, and so now I've got some people behind me. It's awesome. I am out and about. I've got Salman Iqbal and Dan from Cloud Native Wales behind me. I'm in Tramshare Tech in Cardiff,
Cool.
which hopefully we're going to have some great announcements with later on today. But yeah, so welcome everyone from Cloud Natives UK. I believe we got people from Scotland, England, Wales, Ireland, and anywhere else around the world. Welcome, and well, hopefully we're going to have an epic 2 hours. So today we're going to get started with. Well, Paul is going to be talking to us about CFPs because, chaps, have we told anyone yet about Kubernetes Community Days UK?
What's that, Lewis?
Oh, thank you for asking, Adrian. It's a community conference that we've been organising for the last 3 or 4 months, where we've been jumping on calls every Thursday, and we finally got together, ready for September the 15th and 16th, in September, I think I just said. So, and we had a CFP for that, and so Paula, who's also one of the organisers as well, she's put a great talk together just to help understand what a CFP is. Here's Paula now.
Paula.
Hi.
Hey, Paula.
So yeah, Paula's going to help us out with that. Then after Paula, we've got late entry. Sadly, Ivan Pedrezas wasn't able to make it this evening. So to fill in his space, we've got Mr. Andrew Martin, everyone's favorite person to break out containers with. He's going to be talking to us about threat modeling Kubernetes. And then we've got, I'm really excited, we got Carla from Container Solutions, who's going to help us understand what watch parties are with WTF watch parties. So that's going to be super sweet. And we're going to finish off with Liz Rice. And I don't know what she's going to talk about. Any guesses that we might hear? Yeah, but I guess we're all ready to get started. Are we good to go?
Yeah, I think so. Let's
do it.
Let's get on. So Paula, would you like to share your screen?
Yep, hopefully you can see it. Awesome. Thanks, Lewis. Thanks, everybody, for having me. As Lewis said, I'm going to be talking about CFPs. So I gave my talk this really catchy title of CFP FAQ HTH, which translates to call for proposals, frequently asked questions, hope this helps. So I'm going to give just a bit of advice about how to handle CFPs. A quick introduction about me, first of all. So my name is Paula Kennedy. I recently co-founded a startup called Syntasso. We help organizations to run their internal platforms, normally Kubernetes-based platforms, as products. You can find out more on our website, syntasso.io, or you can ping me on Twitter. So why am I talking about CFPs? As Lewis mentioned, I'm one of the co-organizers of Kubernetes Community Days UK, which is an amazing event happening in September. It's the 15th and 16th. As part of that event, we recently ran a CFP ourselves. We got some great speakers, so you should definitely sign up to attend. But what we're really keen to do is encourage more speakers from the local community to submit to KCD events in the future and to local meetups. So I put together this FAQ to hopefully give some advice on how to handle CFPs. Question 1, what's a CFP? CFP stands for call for proposal. It's a fairly standard process used by lots of different events. In most cases, it's just a form that you submit online. You answer some questions. The form then goes to a review committee, which is normally made up of some superheroes because it's quite a lot of work. Those superheroes read the submissions. Depending on the size of event, there can be lots of them. They read the submissions. They will read your submission, see how it fits into the event, see if it fits with the flow, and then make a decision, yes or no. How do I find a CFP? Well, Classic answer, it depends. It depends what you're interested in talking about. It depends on what kind of community you would like to reach out to. But I personally spend a lot of time on Twitter. I mean, I'm a bit of a Twitter addict, but I also find that useful for finding CFPs, finding events, also Google. I did find recently a blog by a person called Phil Nash, and he had listed some useful resources. He found something called CFP Land, which has lots of kind of events advertising. Also, Papercall has lots of events, and there's a link to his blog, which has got lots of other resources that you can look for. What information will you need? Well, it varies, but it's a pretty consistent list of personal information, so your name, job title, who you work for, a short speaker biography. Recommendation from Lewis was to ask someone to write this for you, because normally if you ask someone, a friend in particular, to write one for you, they'll be nicer about you than you are about yourself. But a short bio, what have you been up to, your experience? Then you need to write a talk title and a talk abstract. The talk title is the first thing people will see. If you ever go to a conference or look at a meetup or a conference agenda, it's the first thing you see, the title. So you want to make it something catchy. And then the talk abstract, you need to make sure you give enough details in your abstract so that the review committee and attendees at the event know what you're talking about. Then there's normally a section which is benefits for the community or takeaways for the audience. That's a section where you can give the review committee more information so that they really understand what you're talking about and what people will learn from your talk. And then there's sometimes additional information. So you can put links to past talks that you've done. You can put links to slides or to GitHub repos. You could mention any accessibility requirements that you might have that you want the organizers to understand. But all of this information, what I'd suggest you do is, once you've written it out once, keep it, and then you can reuse it. So if you're submitting to multiple events, you can use the same information. You don't have to keep writing it from scratch. And at this point, it's worth bearing in mind, you don't have to have the talk written. You only have to have the title and the abstract. You can write the rest of the talk later. So what should you talk about? There's so many options, so much advice out there. For me personally, I recommend talking about something that you care about, something you're interested in. It makes it more authentic. It's good to talk about something that you've learned. It can be, lessons learned from a project you've done. It doesn't always have to be success stories either. It could be failures. Some of the most interesting talks I've seen are where people talked about everything that went wrong on a project, which can be really fun and a good learning experience. Beginner talks are also good. So if you've just learned something and you're thinking, well, why would you talk? Because there's so many experts out there. Beginner talks are in themselves expert talks, because people who've been in an area for a while sometimes can't remember what it's like to be a beginner. I'd recommend also, if you're looking at an event, read the details of the call for proposal, understand what the organizers are looking for, or the talk track, understand what that track is about, and find a good fit. You can also watch past recordings if they have them, to understand the types of talk that the event is looking for. And if in doubt, quite often organizers will offer to answer questions. And so if you have questions, ask the organizers. Why me? Well, you might be wondering, why would you talk? But everyone has a story to tell. Even if there's 1,000 talks on the thing that you want to talk about, nobody has the same experience that you've had. Nobody's been on that same journey that you've been on. So if you can tell a story from your perspective and tell your journey, it will be different to everybody else's talk out there. What if I'm too nervous? Everybody gets nervous. There's lots of advice available on how to deal with stage fright. There's courses available. There are TED Talks. For my own personal story, I used to be terrified of public speaking. I would never speak at any event. And then in 2013, I actually gave the eulogy at my mum's funeral, which was the hardest talk I've ever done. But it gave me the courage to think, I will never do a talk as hard as that. And so I first started talking in 2014. But you need to find your own way to really cope with the nerves. And like I say, everyone gets nervous. I mean, I get nervous even now. What's in it for me? That's a good question. Fame, maybe some Twitter followers. Fortune, unlikely. You might find some events do pay. Some events will pay stipends. Some events will do travel costs. If you need financial assistance, if you're reluctant to submit a talk because you think you can't travel, these days There's lots and lots of remote options available, which obviously makes life a bit easier. But even if you haven't got a good microphone or a good camera, or you're worried about something, if in doubt, ask. There's typically, like, some of the bigger events will have money to help first-time speakers or speakers that wouldn't normally necessarily have all the equipment they need. So just ask. There's also options for obviously making good friends, making good connections. I find networking remotely and in person at conferences is really, really good. And I've met so many interesting people. One other benefit I've found is when you're writing a talk, you actually have to document the things that you're trying to convey. It helps you actually understand what you've learned. It's a really good practice to reflect on how far you've come or what the lessons are that you've learned so that you can try and share them. And then the benefit for me, I find the most useful is just helping other people. I love helping people. If I get some feedback from one talk that says, that thing you said really inspired me, that is amazing. That will keep me happy for weeks. Question 8, what if I'm rejected? Happens all the time. Happens all the time. Don't take it personally. I mean, I just got rejected this week from KubeCon. Happens all the time. But I also got accepted to a couple of other events. It's one of those things where there are many reasons why talks don't get accepted. It could be that there's too many talks on the same topic. It could be that there was just far too many submissions for the number of slots available. It could be that it doesn't quite fit. But if that's the case, just try submitting to a few different events. You know, there will be meetups that might want to hear your talk. There'll be big conferences that might be interested. There are so many events available. So just try submitting somewhere else. You can sometimes ask the organizers also for feedback, but if you do that, please be kind, because some of the events have huge numbers of submissions, and then it's very, very hard to give personalized feedback to every single submitter. What if I'm accepted? Well, this is my normal response. Great joy followed by massive panic, because now you actually have to write the talk. So I would generally find out when it's due and then scrap it and then write it a few more times and then burn the candle at both ends and have a freak out. And then I do the talk and there's great joy and great celebration. So that's my typical path. My advice is to practice. People have different process for how they prepare for talks. Some prepare at the very last minute and are writing slides the night before. Some prepare weeks in advance. You will find your process, but just practice a few times. It will help with the nerves, and it will also help you feel confident that you are knowing roughly what you're going to say. And the best piece of advice, just enjoy it. Once you get into it, it's the most amazing thing. So it's one of those things, I like to say, since I started 2014, I've submitted and been accepted to quite a few conferences, and it's a big buzz when it happens. Is there more advice out there? Yes, from much wiser people than I. So there's heaps and heaps of advice on how to write slides, how to present, how to write your biography. There's lots of advice out there. I just want to give a quick shout out for one of my favorite events to support, which is the Global Diversity CFP Day. It's an event that happens globally, as the name might suggest, but it happens once a year, and there's an opportunity. There's lots of very, very talented people who give their advice on how to do different parts of a CFP process and talk, etc. You can sign up to be an organizer in a local city. You can sign up to be a mentor, and you can sign up to attend. It's a fantastic event. So, in summary, be brave, submit some proposals. What's the worst that could happen? Thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful. And I want to do a final plug for KCD UK, 15th and 16th of September. Please join. It's going to be awesome.
Thank you, Paula. That was brilliant. That's just a super talk. Have you given that anywhere else before, or is that the...
No.
No, it's great.
In front of the kids. I gave it in front of the kids today.
No, I think it's a super topic, and it's something that so many people get worried about, and I think there's some brilliant advice in there. I mean, I'd really also reinforce your message about meetups are such a great place to start, because you're in a much smaller environment. You're amongst friends often, and it's a really great place to start, including all of the Cloud Native meetups that are involved in Cloud Natives UK. In all the regions of Britain, we're always looking for speakers. So please do have a look on meetup.com. Most of us just have a form you can submit, And meetups are a great place to start doing conference talks. You know, it's where I started doing talks at meetups way before I ever went and did conferences. I think it's a great place to start.
Yeah.
+1 to all that, and maybe you should submit that one to a CFP as well. That was really good.
Yeah, I think that's a great talk. I'd love to see that at more conferences. You know, I think
I hear there's an event coming up in September. That'd be a good one to submit that for. But yeah, I just wanted to reiterate the meetup submissions as well. We're always really crying out and almost desperate for submissions from folks that, you know, aren't just representing companies to come and talk at meetup. So yeah, please, if you are interested, get in touch.
Great. Okay, thank you, Paula. So we're going to drop you out now and introduce our next fabulous speaker. Let's just move some people around here. I forgot to bring Adrian back in, representing Scotland. Sorry, Adrian.
That's right.
So
there's quite the cast of characters tonight. There's almost too many people to move in and out.
Do you want who's doing the introductions for Andy?
I think Andy could do an introduction himself.
Oh dear.
But I did reference Andy as the Sir Ian McKellen of Blue Teams this week on Twitter. And, so I'm trying to make that one stick. I don't think it's going to happen though.
Thank you, Andy, for stepping in at the last minute. You are in no way the second choice for this slot. We're honoured to have you here. You know, I know you're a great speaker. I've heard you talk many times in the past before. So thank you so much for turning up tonight and helping out. Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I only hope I can fill the inimitable Ivan Pedraz's sizable shoes this evening.
Excellent. Right. Well, I'll without any further ado, I think we'll get you all set up and on your way. I'm going to drop some of us out and leave you the stage.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much. What I have for you this evening is a taster of the threat modeling Kubernetes course that I'm very fortunate to have not only Lewis, who is the head of training at Control Plane, but also some of our other engineers build out. So what we'll go through today is a taster of the course. We will deliver the whole course for free, of course, at KCD UK, and I'm very excited to return to vaguely in-person community events. I think we'll talk about that later on today. So without, again, further ado, hello, I'm Andy. I'm CEO at Control Plane, where we do DevSecOps flavored things for cloud native. And we work with regulated organizations, which means there are more strictures and controls, which to a security person is more interesting. But yes, often puts us in round peg, square hole positions, which we have to engineer around. And that is the kind of thing that I enjoy. And yeah, the full workshop we will deliver at KCD UK. This is very much in the spirit of empowering and building up the community practice of threat modeling. There is also incoming a book on hacking Kubernetes full of YOLO moves and Doge references and the nefarious pirate Captain Hashjack, who will darken your screens later on this evening. This is due to be out in November, and I continually extend my copious thanks to my co-speaker this evening, Liz Rice, for her oversight and stewardship in helping move that along. Right, so what we will look at today is some threat modeling. And I will explain exactly what that means. We'll put it into a Kubernetes context and describe how we might do controls. So first of all, it's worth saying we love Kubernetes, and it's always incumbent upon me to point out that I'm hugely appreciative of the community and the end users and everybody who's contributed their free, often time, to this project, which is just lots of kittens in boxes in my mind. And threat modeling is just a process of understanding our exposure to potential risk. It is not saying that Kubernetes is not worth the bits that it's flipping, because of course it is preeminent in the space. So What is threat modeling, I hear you ask? It is the process of identifying what's wrong with a system. That's the threats that could come in externally. The vulnerabilities may be inherent. It is then saying, for that collection of potentially bad things, how do we fix them? And that collection of bad things is anything that we could imagine. And so the fixes have to be wide-ranging, and they have to be effective against lots of different types of attack. Once we have an idea of what can go wrong, what we might do to fix it, we put those in an order of precedence. This gives us the ability to implement the highest value fixes first, because this isn't a case of just building sort of further concentric rings of bastions and buttresses around our castle. It's a case of applying the most effective and lightweight controls that ultimately deliver business value, because we're all here to continue the success of the companies that pay us, that employ us. It's about empowering developers. It's about making sure that operations teams can effectively operate. And it's about continuous delivery, making sure that ultimately the value to the customer is delivered as quickly as possible, but with the caveat that we care about customer data. Customer data is the lifeblood of any company. It's also entrusted to us by the individuals who interact with our companies. And so it is, again, incumbent upon us to ensure that we look after it. So once we have prioritized the most impactful fixes for the risks, we escalate, we manage those, and we figure out what to do with them. Everybody can and should threat model, not just security teams. And I will belabor Hackney and repeat that to you ad infinitum. Okay, as we head off into space, let's look at how to threat model. Just to reiterate, this is the Lightspeed potted contained version. This is a practice that can take time to develop. It requires some subject matter expertise, but hopefully you'll come out of the end of this talk with enough to at least pique your interest and begin your own threat modeling exploration, or to come and attend another free workshop that we will put on to expound upon these things. So, firstly, what are we building? That is the blueprints for the castle that we're constructing. What can go wrong once it's built? Well, perhaps we forgot to join up these two walls, or maybe no one's remembered to put a chain on the drawbridge, and it's just going to stay down all the time. Once we've got an idea of those things, what will we do about fixing them? Well, we probably want to get a mason to put an extra bit of wall in. Somebody, I don't know who makes chains, maybe a luthier to string together some catgut if there's no available chain gang. I really don't know. That's inappropriate, isn't it? But nevertheless, once we look at those things, we then question, have we done this correctly? And in that case, obviously we haven't, because we need to find, I guess, a blacksmith is probably the guy for the chains. And we consider what we've done, and then we go back to the beginning and re-begin the whole process. So let's start at the beginning. What are we building? It is important to understand the data that flows through the system. Again, this is the lifeblood of the company, and this brings business value. That means we have to know where the data starts, where it travels to be presented to the user, where it might be stored, where it might be logged. And these things are all part of a cloud-native system. We've changed this because traditionally we would know. We come in through a DMZ, we go into a certain area of the system, and we've probably got like static network routes going in different directions. We use that architecture to build out maybe IP-based restrictions or put firewalls in position. Cloud native changes that model. It inverts it, and it means that while we get advantages of bin packing and production resilience, scalability, we lose some of that IP to pod identity. Data flows become more complex. We may be transiting data between pods and nodes that we didn't necessarily expect. So it's important to model this and to understand exactly where it goes. Secondarily, we care about the attackers, the adversaries. This is where the dastardly and dreadful Captain Hashjack comes in, and we model that type of attacker as perhaps a script kiddie, someone who will just drive by and try and deface, try and gain some personal reputational gain. Or perhaps we modeled them as organized crime, which is perhaps looking to extort a ransom. Or we say it's actually the danger here is a full-on foreign intelligence service, James Bond styles, and this means that we need to modify what we do to defend against them in a different way. I mean, if somebody has rockets under the hood of their car, well, perhaps they're more likely to be dangerous when they approach our gate than if somebody's cycling up on a bicycle. Once we've considered those things, we then use the unholy trinity of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are used to model threats. They are old as time. They're very traditional security mechanisms, but they highlight the fact that cloud native does not mean throwing traditional practices out. It means adapting them for a new deployment style and a new runtime methodology mechanism. Those impact levels are organization dependent. So for an example company, we may say that financial loss and a minimal reputational damage, let's call that level 1. Level 2 might be, well, actually, we've got into the papers and we've been besmirched by Rupert Murdoch in some way. And that reflects badly upon us because it might impact our share price, for example. Finally, when we're talking about level 3, we're talking a kind of Yahoo 2 billion email data breach. We're talking an Equifax sort of class action lawsuit size. Obviously, these are dependent upon the size of your organization, but we define them and then we use them to categorize our risks. We might say a financial institution cares more about financial loss, whereas in a military context, we've got a very real concern with loss of civilian life, loss of military life, operational failures having wider reaching effects on infrastructure, against civilian infrastructure. These things, again, are varied. We see, again, if we're looking for a bank cares about getting the money to the right person in the right volume, making sure the order of magnitude is correct and that the recipient and the sender are who are expected. But when actually making the card payment, someone else, confidentiality is the more important part. And that's because we have an expectation with the bank that that will be a private transaction. One of those is about confidence in the bank itself, and the other is about confidence in the payment system, or the from the consumer's perspective, the banking system. And the digital nemesis 8-bit adversary, Captain Hashjack, makes an appearance. Here is an example threat actor. Threat actors have different capabilities. So somebody who is able to use Metasploit and openly available tooling has a limited set of capability available to them. That includes things that have been proven before and somebody has open sourced exploit code. A government intelligence agency is probably quietly building their own exploit code in the background. And I'm sure we're aware of major events that have occurred to this end. Somewhere in the middle sits something like a game development startup, where we might have script kiddies trying to get access to the systems so that they can frag to their heart's content. Or as we saw with with Valve a few years ago, somebody actually exfiltrated the source code for one of their engines and just dropped it publicly. Steam managed it reasonably well. And again, we kind of play into the dark arts of publicity and media management. But these things, as part of reputation, have an impact on the bottom line of very large organizations. And there is the Pirate Captain Hashjack in all his glory. So on an adversary matrix, this gives us a broad idea and it allows us to calibrate our defenses based upon the expected attackers. Vandals are the least dangerous, if you like. We've kind of graded these by capability. Motivated individuals and insiders form a slightly different and difficult area. Insiders specifically, it's been estimated that about 1 in every 40,000 employees at major organizations is an insider with a nefarious ultimate goal. Who knows what that ratio is? I heard it on a podcast. Seems a reasonable number to guess, whether it's sort of 10 or 20,000 either way. At some point, we can be pretty sure that there are hostile actors within our security boundary, within the perimeter of our organization, with access cards, able to access our networks. So we have to consider their motivation, and we have to consider the controls that we can use to prevent them from, for example, escalating from their desktop onto the mainframe or whatever it is that people want to get to. Organized crime, we're talking about cryptojacking, things like the Colonial Pipeline hack from the last couple of months. There are a very real concern that, in general, organizations are poorly protected, especially critical national infrastructure. And we've seen this repeatedly over the past few years. It is likely that this will escalate over the next few. Cloud service insiders, well, these are pretty rare. We did see one involved in the Capital One hack. They had used information that they got while employed, were no longer employed, but also had some cunning web application firewall IAM bypass techniques up their sleeves. And finally, foreign intelligence services. We're talking Stuxnet. We're talking the North Korean hack on Sony. I mean, I don't know why I'm attributing one and not the other. Your guess is as good as mine in all these cases, but nation states play these games, and it is part of the modern cyber threat and political landscape. Okay, so what are we building, and who would like to get into the building that we're constructing? Now, what can go wrong? As you know from the Alien films, quite a lot potentially can go wrong. This is about ideation. This is almost a game. We look at our systems, we enter the mindset of the adversary, and we say, how do I get into that system? This is all about your team's experience, gut instinct, and intuition. There is no fix for this. It's ideally done around a whiteboard or a digital platform. It's also really useful to go away and spend some time ideating alone. It's a diffuse thought exercise where there is no wrong answer, and everything can be logged, categorized, combined, or killed. And from there, we end up with some sort of list. Secondarily, we then refer to threat intelligence sources. So first of all, we gather all the possibilities. Secondarily, we look at the existing lists that define categorically different types of attack. We can see here application security and DevSecOps tended to be kind of linked together. DevSecOps, as it stands with infrastructure, I prefer the term defensive DevOps because it disambiguates slightly and loses the eternal push-pull of definition that goes on with that word. So from a DevSecOps and AppSec perspective, things like the OWASP project, things like threat modeling, these are traditional tools. From an infrastructure perspective and defensive DevOps, we care more about the MITRE ATT&CK framework, about the CNCF financial services attack tree, and the Microsoft Kubernetes attack matrix. Once we've been through those sources and gathered the things that we believe could potentially happen to our system, we jump into modeling techniques, and we will look at those. Here is a whistle-stop view of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Here is the OWASP top 10. Notably focused on applications and not on infrastructure. And finally, the Microsoft Threat Matrix for Kubernetes. This is more what we care about with a cloud-native system, and the enumeration of techniques, or the sort of variants of techniques on here, are broadly what we can expect to see against a cloud-native system. I would call out privileged escalation does not include container breakout, which seems like an oversight. Things like the NetFilter CVE from this year, various BPF, what's the word I'm looking for? Verifier attacks, things with CAPSYS admin and controls that can be exploited to sort of escalate privilege. So yes, herein lies something that we can start with and then say what in here actually applies to our system. Once we have those things, we go through the stride process. This involves saying for each attack, how could I spoof this thing? So for kube control access to the API server, how could I spoof this thing? Well, maybe I could go and steal some credentials from my neighbor. Maybe I could run a supply chain attack that exfiltrates the credentials from their .cube directory when they install my npm package. Maybe I could dress up as a maid and perform the evil maid attack, and then off we go. We've actually stolen the physical device. So any of these things are ways to claim an identity and sort of compromise that initial part. Next, we're into tampering. Are we safe communicating between a kube control installation and the API server? Well, probably. We're relying on modern cryptographic, hopefully post-quantum protocols, he says, depending on exactly how that's routed. And that means that we can probably be sure that pending major intelligence services recording all traffic and decrypting it 5 to 20 years in the future, at the moment, we're not going to be tampered with in this communication. Repudiation is the process of proof that a thing either happened or didn't happen. Again, we rely on cryptography to defend us there. Information disclosure, we're probably safe. Maybe there's a middleware box that we could consider. Maybe if someone could force a downgrade attack, which is obviously far less likely with modern TLS protocols. Denial of service, okay, well, that's difficult. We should take the API server's endpoint off the public internet. Immediate fix for a large class of problems. And then finally, elevation of privilege. Well, that's a Kubernetes RBAC problem, maybe a cloud provider integration issue. And so we should consider that. And those are the threats that we're logging down. I know I solutionized one of them, but actually we're looking for the threat that the system is at risk of. Once we have those threats, we put them into an attack tree. An attack tree is a useful way of visualizing. These are abstract problems. Security is difficult enough as it is, and having something concrete that we can share as a communications mechanism, something to rationalize, something to annotate, is super beneficial. And it's my strongest recommendation. Going from the abstract threat modeling exercise to the concrete attack tree diagrammatical exercise is super valuable and really strongly recommended. Here is an attack tree for carrying a briefcase to a locker. So we can see here that the negative outcome is at the top. So this is a top-down attack tree. So to leak a sensitive document, that is an OR node in green at the top. That means any of its child nodes could be fulfilled in order to get to that top node. So if we take the leftmost view, leak a sensitive document, well, any of the tier below, but let's choose compromised delivery person. Again, that is a green OR node. So any of those two child nodes could be fulfilled in order to satisfy that condition. So if we compromise a delivery person by impersonating them, well, then we see we're back to our attacker, and that is a complete route through the attack tree that we would look to defend by cutting one of the branches with a control. What will we do about it? Well, we will apply controls. In this case, mashing the controls. The cloud shared responsibility model means, depending upon the platform, we can offload some of this to the cloud provider. But not everything, especially with a cloud-native system, we have some responsibility. We're looking to maintain our nodes to some extent to ensure that we don't misconfigure them, which of course is all a testing game, and the workloads that we're running are never the responsibility of the cloud provider. So for each threat, we have a short list of things that we can do. We can just remove the feature altogether. So in terms of the API server denial of service, let's take it off the public internet. Let's put it behind a VPN or a privileged access or an identity-aware proxy. This is not security by obscurity. It is just another layer of defense. We're looking to avoid the risk of public denial of service. We could mitigate it, reducing the risk by implementing security controls. Well, we could firewall the thing. I suppose actually, sorry, I've misspoken there. Avoiding it would be removing the API server altogether, which, you know, the cluster will continue to run. Maybe we could, there's a thought experiment there. Maybe you could run lots of subclusters and it might still run, but that doesn't seem possible. So avoiding it is just removing the problem. Mitigating it is enacting a control. And that's our firewalling or our VPN or whatever we've chosen to do. We could accept the risk and say, like many people who run public cloud services using GKE or EKS, they say, well, fine. We know that there is such a depth of network infrastructure protection on the routes that we take to send packets to the API server. If that looks like it's going to start to get a denial of service, we believe that the cloud provider will drop those packets and keep us safe. Not my personal recommendation, but it's possible. And the last thing we can do is transfer the risk. This is basically the Teflon shouldered approach, where we say, even if this happens, and we knew it was going to happen, we will put it into our terms of service so our users accept it, or we will take out a substantial insurance policy or sufficiently substantial insurance policy to deal with the, I guess, the SLA reimbursement for customers. The trick is not to leave any threat unaddressed. Okay, into Kubernetes flavored stuff. What can we do? Well, we can prevent things, which is stopping them before they get to production. We can detect them, which is saying, okay, we accept that we might ship things to production that are wrong or bad or malicious in some way, but we'll make sure to detect them either through logging, intrusion detection, some form of analysis of our application. There's a balance there, of course. Corrective controls are those that have automated remediation features. For example, that could be, I guess a corrective control, it is automatically dropping traffic as well. If we do receive a DNS reflection attack or an old school sort of SYN flood, then correctively, if we had a Lambda that noticed that, that could just apply a firewall to that port or the destination of that traffic. Of course, we defer this to the cloud because that's part of the shared responsibility model. Or we can use old school controls. Of course, we can't because the cloud requires a different way of operating. The best balance of these controls is as much preventative as practical without being a constraint on your delivery, and enough detective, I guess, again, to be practical, but not as a primary control. If we rely primarily upon detective controls, we accept that what we ship to production may not be up to standard, and therefore there's a risk window that is proportionate to the preventative controls that we've used in the pipeline. Did we do a good job? We ask ourselves. Well, in this case, potentially. In order to understand the answer to this question, we choose the controls that we want to add. We put them onto the attack tree so that we can see visually what we've done. And then we consider the branches that we've actually cut from the tree. So we have our nodes and our vectors. It's where those travel between. If we can apply a control that also prevents numerous other attacks, that is more effective. And we should optimize for controls that are less developer heavy, I would say, and more friendly. And secondarily, that chop as many branches off and as many attacks as possible in order to be, again, as effective as possible. Once we've done that, we assess the resulting security of the system. This is a kind of reflective opportunity to consider, what did we do? Did it make sense? And we can also model new attacks in the light of the understanding that we have. Here is one that was prepared earlier by my glamorous colleagues. What we can see is we have various attacks. We're looking at attacking sensitive data, and then we have multifarious and numerous controls smattered amongst them. Some of these controls, for example, we can see on the right-hand side, data returned from AWS API call, plain text credentials in source control. And then we access sensitive data. So, of course, it's top-down again, so we're looking at the inverse flow. There's only one control there, really, and that is to prevent plain text controls, secrets, sorry, getting into our source control. If we were to do a slightly different threat model, because scoping is all important, scoping is the lens or the microscope that we apply to a system and say, I will only pay attention to the thing that I can see. Everything else outside of this for now is beyond my area of interest. I will make assumptions, I will document those, but a bit like trying to count ants. So many, moving all the time. Really, you just want to focus in on a little bit of space and try and count them before they move. That makes it seem like an intractable problem. It's not quite as bad as counting ants. Maybe they're slightly larger than average. The name of the game is Preparation for the Unexpected. It is about guessing what could possibly happen, grading that on a likelihood basis, and applying controls to prevent it. Right, that was a light speed tour. I winged some of it. Apologies for a few of the wild mistakes. I look forward to doing the whole thing. We do this thing for a living. If you're interested in other bits and bobs, and that is the end of the speed run. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bravo, Andy. Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much for that talk. And yeah, we've got a couple of questions on the chat, but one I would like to just get started with straight away. Like September the 15th and 16th, when you're presenting this workshop, it can't come soon enough. And I need to start doing this now because we got a problem no, this is fictional. This isn't us, by the way. We've got a problem right now and we need to start threat modeling it. Where do I pick up from here? What would you recommend? What are the next steps if this is brand new to me and I want to take us a little bit further?
That is an excellent question. Of course, KCD is the ultimate place to find the answer to that. But in the meantime, there are some definitive tomes. One of them is Adam Shostak's book, Threat Modeling. O'Reilly have a recent book on threat modeling out as well. And there is some open source work in the financial services user group under the CNCF that has attack trees. And those attack trees are built against the core Kubernetes orchestrator itself, looking at negative outcomes like loss of data, denial of service, take over the cluster, hostile compute. Each one is scoped slightly differently and gives a different view on one of my favorite words, incidentally, is catastrophizing. Partially because it's difficult to say, and partially because it's a useful thing to do to kind of get it all out and then say it's not really that bad. Worse things happen at sea. So this really is a catastrophizing exercise, and the more the merrier.
So,
and of course, if you're interested in cloud native security, you should come and hang out with the fine folks in the CNCF tag security and the other Kubernetes. Are they still a SIG in Kubernetes? I've slightly lost touch with that one, but
yeah, the SIG is now reserved for the Kubernetes from what I understand from my last attendance. And yeah, excellent point. The technical advisory group on security, STAG or tag security. There's a little bit of an identity crisis, but it is the preeminent cloud native security collective. There are some unbelievably smart people in there. And there are also lots of people like me who just love tagging along and learning. They've published threat models. In fact, they've threat modeled 3 or 4 major difficult things right now. There's a Spiffy Spire threat model from a few years ago that includes things like the compromise effects and the blast radius of what happens if bits of identity are stolen. These are great places to learn and great places to watch the process in flow.
Excellent. And you are also one of our fine speakers, I believe, at Kubernetes Community Days UK. So you can also hear Andy talk about something entirely different about security, I imagine. So
one more question, Andy, as well. Your book, Hacking Kubernetes, when is it available? Where can I get it from? Where is it now? Where?
That's a very good question. Yes, Mark says, is it available as a rough cut? Indeed, it is. Let's just say, had I entered into this with the knowledge I have now, I would have done things very differently. My co-author, Mr. Michael Hassenblas, is preeminent in his field and has been very calm and collected throughout the whole thing. The rough cut that's up on Safari Online has been mangled into a different shape over the intervening months. So yeah, by all means, have a look at that one. The all singing, all dancing, gilt-edged, gold-plated version, which I'm trying to avoid going over and over on, will be out in November. It is on O'Reilly. I will be slinging it round conferences. Lewis, I'd be happy to sign it in person and hand you a traditional Dead Tree copy, which is my favorite type of book.
Thank you, Andy. I've got one really very important question. I should have started with this. So your GIFs, or if you're wrong, GIF. Where are you getting these from? Because I hadn't seen that cat one before. So are you commissioning someone to create these now? Where can I find these?
There is no finer joy than having Lewis inquire where I procured a GIF. I'm bursting with happiness. Yes, that one I believe is a custom rework. It's only because you have the length and breadth of the internet scoured and catalogued in GIF terms, and where else do I have to go, dude?
I have a limited set of skills, but moving pictures is one of them.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Andy. Brilliant. Right, onwards. Let's just drop you out, Andy. Right, Lewis, who's next?
So I think we've got the pleasure of Carla next, and myself. So here's Carla.
Hello.
Hello. So
welcome.
We're here to talk about something linked to our conference that I don't think we've mentioned yet, Kubernetes Community Days UK. So part of this Kubernetes Community Days has a keyword in it being community. And now with the position where we are with COVID, we're getting into a position where we can actually start seeing people again. So we've come up with this concept of the watch party. Now, to bring it back a couple of years, I first met Carla at Skills Matter in London, or Code Node, and for me, that was London, and I've never felt so welcomed in a place. And it was the first time I went to meetups, and I just met so many like-minded people, and I met Carla. I kept delivering Welsh cakes to you, and yeah, and but you were the organizer for these events, and so where are you now?
Well, now I'm heading events at a new company. It's called Container Solutions, and yeah, I joined last year, and it's been a great ride so far.
You've had a couple of conferences as well, so following the WTF format, I believe.
Yes. We had one in May, which was called WTF is SRE. So it was all around operations, DevOps, observability. It was a lot of fun because we also wear costumes all the time, and that's why we also had costumes at Software Circus, which is our other community event. So yeah. All over.
Shout out to Mark Coleman there, Software Circus. Yes, that was amazing. And well, so Salman and myself, we were so inspired by what we saw that we wanted to bring it home, and that's where Cloud Native Wales started. And we did not have a clue where to get started. We just wanted to bring speakers across and start to build up a community local in Cardiff, local to where we were, because to be honest, that train fare was getting out of hand towards the end of going to London for a night for a meetup. But there's a couple of things when we started creating this event that we weren't necessarily aware of. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us some of the hints, tips and tricks that you'd give, because this thing is a watch party. What we're hoping to do with Kubernetes Community Days UK is have watch parties across the UK or wherever you're based, actually. And this is to encourage people, if it's safe to do so, if it's within your personal threat model, meaning, as we've just heard Andy discuss his threat modeling, if you're comfortable to meet other people, then let's try and get together again, because like we've done here today in Tramshed Tech, there's a couple of us who we all got to know each other incidentally via the meetup. So we've all come together, and it's kind of exciting again, just to be able to catch up and talk tech for a while and just like catch up with each other. So what if I was going to do a watch party, what would you recommend that I have in place?
Right. Yes, it's exciting / scary because it's been a while since we've all been together. So it's good to be prepared. But yes, I will definitely start from the basics. And the first point that I recommend is to have a code of conduct in place, which is something very simple that you can put together, but it makes such a massive difference for your event. Because in the code of conduct, you can set the tone of your conference or event. You can create the right environment that you want to see, which means that you can also ensure that everybody is feeling safe, everybody respects each other, and they just can have fun without worrying about feeling any kind of threat.
Yeah, because when we started Calamity of Wales, for us it was a basis of we're just going to bring the party that we just wanted to organize a party. When I was younger, I used to have house parties in school, so it's just like, that's what a meetup is. It's just a house party, but somewhere else. But having this code of conduct and getting to know people within the community as well. I'm learning that other people have different, everyone's different, and having this line that we can all agree on and we can adhere to, it gives us that position where, because in all honesty, we just want to talk heck at the end of the day. We just like to hear each other's stories, and that's what's really brought us all together. I've never wanted to exclude anyone for whatever reason. So being able just to learn this, and it isn't a big thing, it's a case of as soon as you learn it, it's just putting something in place that's so easy to do. But I guess that's thinking of others. How do you find out, like, thinking for others? Because it's really difficult for me to understand what other people think. What would you recommend for that?
Well, as I said, everybody's different. Everybody has different requirements. But again, it's just small details that can make such a big difference. For example, making sure that you are providing different kind of food for any kind of dietary requirements. So think about vegetarian options, vegan, gluten-free, or any other allergies. You can make sure that you are aware of those beforehand. But then it's also about, the drinking part, because the classic meetup formula is pizza and beer, but not everybody drinks alcohol. So it's always good to have different options and making sure that, they all feel included and they can join the fun. And it's also about understanding, everybody's boundaries and everybody's needs, and making sure that you know how people want to be addressed. And especially if they specify that they want to use a specific pronoun, it's good to be aware and do so.
Yeah, and I've updated my pronoun here now, and yeah, it's just it makes so much sense to me. So with that, I guess we got to talk about the elephant in the room, which I hope isn't in anyone's room right now, would be COVID. And it's I'm not going to talk about that because we've all experienced it over the last 18 months. For me, it's a case of we have to move forward. We can't go back to normal. It's a case of we've got to embrace what we have now. And at this moment in time within the UK, it's all, again, we're a little bit different in each of our meetups because of the countries that we're in. But the rules are relaxed a little bit, so it's allowing us to meet up in person again. Hence why, again, this is a venue where we're hoping to have one of our watch parties within Cardiff, which would be Tramshed Tech, and I hope people could come to the conference here as well. What tips, is there anything that you've already experienced by hosting events that you could compare to this? Is there anything that you would advise people to think about prior to hosting a watch party?
Well, I think we're all learning a lot, obviously, but in general, something that is extremely important is to clearly communicate your requirement. So obviously, if depending on the venue or the place where you're going to host a watch party, that there are going to be some rules in place. So make sure to communicate these rules in advance to everybody participating. Make sure that if you require people to be double vaccinated in order to access the party, for example, mention that clearly before in different communications ahead of the event, so everybody is aware and it's not going to be surprised on the day, oh no, I cannot really join it. And then obviously it's good, even though, like you said, in the UK especially, restrictions are like basically loose now. There's not really any particular rules that you have to follow. It's still good to make sure that people are comfortable first of all, they don't have to join a venue if they don't comfortable to stay with people yet. That is fine. But even when you meet them in person, make sure to ask questions like, okay, are you comfortable for me being this distant from you? Is it okay if we stand next to each other? And try to still avoid shaking hands and touching people in general, because yeah, that's just extra safety that might ensure a better peace of mind for everybody.
Yeah, because I don't know what's going to happen when I go in to see like hundreds of people in the same room now. It's been so long. I've just been, as you've probably seen from other Cloud Native UK meetups, just in my spare room. So meeting people again, and probably some people that I don't necessarily know, it's all just going to be a little bit weird to begin with. But again, if we can, I think that's the key thing that you said. And a lot of this comes down to communication. It's a way of being able for people to communicate to us, and also giving people empowerment to be able to speak back and for us to learn from it and go forward. So what about the watch parties? What would you recommend as to where to host these watch parties? Again, because the parties, well, the events that you've hosted, honestly, like they have been so amazing. Like if anyone, I don't know if anyone on this channel at this moment in time can add any events that they've been to at Skills Matter or any of the container solution events that Carl has been part of, but it's phenomenal. So where would you recommend having these watch parties?
Well, the best part, first of all, thank you. You're making me blush. But the good part about watch parties is that they can happen almost everywhere. I mean, of course, there are some basic requirements. You just need a screen and some audio in order to listen to the content. But that can be at your office, for example, which is like one of the best locations because you can also welcome other people there, and they can see your environment, they can see all the cool things that you do every day. So that's one of the top locations in my opinion. But not everybody has an office, so there are a lot of co-working space where people go every day. Those, as long as there is a screen, again, you can easily host a watch party. But there are also other options. So if you want to gather after the conference is over, the all good parties and drinks, celebrations post-conference, you can also book a table at a restaurant or a public house or pub. Just go there, hang out with your friends, and enjoy the post-event frenzy.
Yeah, because in Cardiff, I was just walking down the street, and like in the arcades, again, people in Cardiff, we've got the vintage arcades where it's got like games consoles from the last 30 years. It can be a board game cafe, and this is just back to, just because I like going to the pub doesn't mean that everyone does. But then this is the thing, as a community, if I just do what I like, then that might be leaving some people out. So it's really, if we can have people work together or just feel like they can contribute to this is just going to make the event so much better. So what are the next points? If someone does feel like they could contribute to a watch party, what do you recommend they do next?
Well, there is a lovely email address in here that you can use to reach out to the amazing organizers of Kubernetes Community Days UK. I'm not going to read it because it's a lot of acronyms. It's the day of the acronyms today, right? But please feel free to reach out to them. They are going to help you and support you. And I'm also happy to answer any questions you might have. My Twitter handle is at the bottom of the slides, and I can share more tips or any advice that you might need. And of course, don't forget to tell all your friends, colleagues, anybody that might be interested. The more, the merrier.
And I think that's key, because to be able to run events like this isn't just about having speakers and presenters. We need office space, and it might be that a company might have some money that they can contribute to an event so that you could rent a room, you could rent a space in a bar. But to be able to do this, we really do need to have people communicate. So if you do know your local meetup organizer, feel free to contact them direct. we've got that email address there that has all of us as organizers, so we can direct the queries there. And we put so much effort into this conference so far that we really want to see it succeed. So please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be helping out as we can. But to that, Carla, I think we've got something else as well that's happening within Container Solutions later on in this year that might be linked to a lightning talk that we had earlier on today. So, that's it.
That's it. I mean, the lightning talk was amazing, and yes, we are on the same boat, because we just launched an hybrid conference that is going to happen partially in London and partially all around the world, which is the culmination of our journey with WTF is Cloud Native. 4th of November, you can save the date, but the most important thing is that the call for papers is still open. So I put the link in there. We are still accepting submissions till the 22nd of August. So, plenty of time. People submit always the day before. I know how it goes.
Yeah, well, get your proposals in, and thank you so much. So it's been a hybrid conference, so your one is going to actually have a venue as well, is it? Or is that still to be confirmed?
Well, no. Well, yes, of course, we hope to have a venue, and that's why I reached out to old friends at CodeNode, the hub of tech in London. So yes, we're all gathered there, hopefully, yes.
Well, I'm looking forward to the rejection email soon, but I will definitely be there as an attendee as well. So thank you for your time, Carla. Thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you, Carla.
Thanks, Carla.
So and for folks who are listening to this stream, obviously this event, Cloud Natives UK, is a collaboration between a whole bunch of CNCF meetups across the UK, Wales, Bristol, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Manchester, and now Birmingham also. We added to the Cloud Natives UK family for this event. So all of our meetup groups are going to be trying to organize watch parties for Kubernetes Community Days. So please reach out to the organizers of your local CNCF meetup group to find out about what may be available around you. And as Carla and Lewis said, feel free to contact any of us or the KCD UK email address if you're interested in hosting a watch party, running one, going to one, whatever. Great, thank you, Carla. Right, let's drop Carla out. Time for the highlight of this evening's entertainment.
Lewis. I thought we were done. Is there something else?
Oh, are we? We're done. Right. Okay. I'll press the big red button.
Drum roll.
Yeah. Right. Who's doing this introduction? Someone else. Nick.
Well, like our like the lineup, like the introductory lineup says on Meetup, I think our next speaker needs no introduction. It's none other than Liz Rice. She appears to be a particularly busy individual because not only is she the Chief Open Source Officer with eBPF Pioneers Isovalent, she's also the chair of the CNCF Technical Oversight Committee, a fellow ambassador, should I say, for Open UK, as well as a co-author of numerous books, including Container Security, Fundamental Technology Concepts that Protect Containerized Applications. So Liz, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I think earlier on this evening, Lewis said he wasn't totally sure what I was going to talk about today. And for a reason that I'm about to talk about, I really had no choice. It had to be eBPF today. It's a technology that I'm very excited about. I want to talk about why it's capable of revolutionizing the way we do networking and observability and security in cloud native and beyond. And the reason why today is such an appropriate day to talk about it is that we have just within the last couple of hours announced a new eBPF Foundation. Isovalent's a founding member along with Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Netflix. And really this is about kind of formalizing the community that already exists, that's building this amazing technology within the Linux kernel and now also in other operating systems as well. So brand new foundation, and we're super excited about that announcement. So what even is this eBPF thing that I'm talking about?
Let's drop some of us folks out, Liz, and
all right, yeah. Yeah, so I could tell you it stands for Extended Berkeley Packet Filter. That isn't terribly helpful. I don't think the acronym is particularly, it doesn't really explain very much. What you really need to know is that eBPF lets you run custom programs within the kernel. It makes it programmable. I heard a really nice analogy that eBPF is to the kernel what JavaScript is to HTML. So I quite like that analogy. And if we're going to run code in the kernel, it probably makes sense to know that you probably know that we run application code in user space, and we're going to have some way of loading our eBPF program into the kernel. There are some system calls that allow us to do that. And we attach those eBPF programs to events. There are lots of different types of events that we can attach to. We could attach to the arrival of a network packet, or a particular system call being triggered, or we can attach to trace points. We can actually attach to any function entry or exit point in user space or kernel applications. There are also some special hooks related to security events called LSM. So there are a ton of these events. And each time we hit one, if there's an eBPF program attached to it, we can run that code. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you an extremely simple demo, if I can switch my screen over. So this is the hello world of eBPF. So let's make my hello world say something appropriate, like hello Cloud Native UK. So this is a C program, and this is the program that I'm going to run within the kernel. And I'm using a BPF helper function that creates some tracing. And I'm saying that I'm going to attach it as a kernel probe on the execve system call. So that's the bit that's going to run in the kernel. And I also have to write some user space code that's going to load this file that I'm going to compile into an object file. It loads a BPF program, which is really just that function, and it's going to attach it to execve system call. So execve is the system call that happens whenever you want to run a program. Every time you if you start a new process and run a new program, the execve system call is what's going to be triggered to make that happen. So I have a make file, and the kind of important parts of this are that there's part of this to compile or build my Go component, to build my user space component, and part of it to build my kernel component, and it's specifying that I want a BPF target. So if I'll make this clean and then make it, it should run both the Clang C compiler and the Go, there's the Go build part as well. So if I run this, I'll just run this as a non-privileged user to start with, and I'm not allowed to do so. I do have to be either root, or I have to have a particular privilege called cat BPF to be allowed to run it. I run a sudo, and we should see a ton of events because I'm running this through Visual Studio Code. There's a ton of stuff happening in the background that is triggering lots and lots of these execve events. So that's, as I say, the hello world example of a BPF program. One thing that you might notice here is that the tracing gave us some information, and I'll go back and show it here. These numbers here are the process IDs, and we can see things about the executable that was the context in which this system call was run. And the reason why I point that out is, we have this contextual information from within the kernel about why we're being triggered, what's happening, that what the context is for this event being triggered. And we can take use of that this information for observability, for tracing, for all kinds of monitoring and measuring within the kernel. So what if we were to take this programmability into the world of cloud native? What does programmable kernels mean in Kubernetes environments? So in Kubernetes, our applications are all running as containers, and those containers are inside pods. But however many containers and however many pods we have, there is one kernel per host. If that host is a virtual machine or a physical machine, there's just the one kernel. And that kernel is shared by all of those containers and all of those pods. Every time a pod wants to do something, pretty much anything useful, like make a network request or read something from a file or write something or create another container, all of these events have to go via the kernel. User space can do very little without the assistance of the kernel. So the kernel can see all this stuff happening, and it's aware of everything that's happening across the entire machine and the entire user space and all of the pods. So if we hook eBPF programs into events in the kernel, we can be aware of everything that's happening in those user space applications. We can use these eBPF programs to tie together observability and security and networking across all of these user space applications. So another example that I'm just going to show is the idea of taking this contextual information for observability purposes. So this is just a screenshot of Cilium, and what we're seeing in the top half of the screen is like a network flow diagram. We can see where traffic is flowing between different components, and in the bottom half we can see individual flows between different components. And the point of this is that we can see what pods are involved. Now, in a cloud native environment, pods come and go, all the time. Containers come and go all the time. But because we have the contextual information of Kubernetes, we can not only see what pods involved, we can see what services are involved, and we can get this much more meaningful view of what network traffic is flowing within our system. So eBPF applications can have this perspective across everything that's happening across an entire Kubernetes node. And that not only helps us with observability, it also helps us with building really high performance networking. So normally, each container has its own networking stack, and there's also a networking stack on the host. And every time a packet is going to flow to or from a pod, traditionally it had to traverse the networking stack on the host first and then get routed into the pod. With an eBPF approach, we can bypass a ton of that because we can be aware of the pods and the addresses of those pods as they come and go. We can keep track of that. And so let's say we have a packet arrive, it's destined for a particular IP address. A networking solution like Cilium or Calico can look up what IP address is involved and send the packet straight to the virtual Ethernet interface involved. We don't have to go via that whole host networking stack to figure out where it needs to go. We did a series of performance benchmarking around this. This is a flame graph showing how much time has been spent in those different parts of the network flow. And this is really more to say, look, you can imagine on the left-hand side, that's where our packet arrives, and it spends a bit of time in the eBPF code running on the host. And then on the right-hand side, it spends some time in the networking stack within the container. And the bottom line of that is that eBPF-based networking solutions perform better. You can check out the blog post for all of the details, but whether you're looking at Cilium or Calico, if you compare the eBPF version to a version that's not using eBPF, you will see significantly better performance. The blue bar in this diagram is just baseline node to node as fast as you can go without any containers involved. And you can see that with BPF, we're getting really quite close to that level of performance. eBPF applications, as we've said, they have this view across the entire node. And one really key thing about this is you don't have to change your applications in any way to take advantage of this. You don't have to configure your applications to take advantage of this. You just have to be able to load BPF programs into the kernel. And then they can be aware of whatever's happening in user space. So what do we normally do in a traditional pre-eBPF environment if we want to add tracing or networking observability services to a Kubernetes pod? Well, we typically have had some kind of sidecar model. And I really love this little cartoon that Nathan Leclerc put together, essentially talking about how eBPF can replace the need for adding sidecars into pods. So let's just explore that a little bit more. The sidecar container in a pod, it's one of the containers within the pod, and it has a view across that pod. You have to add that container. This might be done automatically for you, but there has to be some YAML definition somewhere that defines the sidecar container along with your application containers for each pod. So whether you configure those sidecar containers manually or whether it's done through some kind of pre-deployment automation, maybe it's done as part of admission control, something has to define the sidecar. What if that goes wrong? What if it's misconfigured? You could end up with the sidecar not being present and nothing being aware of what's going on inside that pod. In an eBPF situation, we don't need any of those application changes. We have the eBPF programs running in the kernel. No need for any changes whatsoever to our user space application, to our pod configuration. We don't need any YAML changes at all. So what kind of applications are we talking about here? There are quite a few in the cloud native community already or getting very close to. I'm sure a lot of you have used and are familiar with Falco. It's an eBPF solution for detecting security events. Prior to having the eBPF solution, they had a kernel module solution, and it's maybe worth just spending a couple of minutes thinking about kernel modules. Kernel modules, or even making a change to the kernel itself, it's a big deal, right? You have to, you may have to recompile a kernel. You don't know whether your kernels are going to be consistent across all your different machines, which you do want them to be. Rebooting the machine, it's quite a big deal. Not to mention that if you want a change to the kernel itself, that's typically going to take several years. If your application needs kernel support, that's not a quick process. It takes a long time for the code changes in the kernel might not be the problem, but actually getting through the whole release cycle process, getting to the point where that change has been picked up by distributions, and then to the point where it's installed on the machines that you're using, perhaps in your public cloud provider, that is going to take years. With eBPF, we can make changes that affect the behavior of the kernel instantly. We can load those eBPF programs on the fly. You don't have to make any changes at all. So I think, Falco's move from kernel modules to eBPF was extremely valuable and extremely, makes Falco much more accessible to many applications. Tracy is another eBPF-based security solution that comes from my former colleagues at Aqua Security. Again, looking for security events. One of the things that they do differently from Falco is looking at, I mentioned the LSM events, the security events that are sort of distributed within the kernel and can allow you to find things in a more granular way than just looking at syscalls. Cilium, of course, Isovalent, where I'm now working, is the inventor of Cilium networking product, which, that project has been around for kind of 4 years. It's in the process of hopefully being approved by the CNCF. With my TOC hat on, I have to try and remain so not biased, but obviously I think a lot of people are very excited about the fact that Cilium, after all this time, is now looking to become part of the CNCF family. And then also, we want to mention Pixie, which is perhaps the new kid on the block. It's a sandbox project based on BCC eBPF project, using that for observability and producing some really nice graphs and tools to see how your applications are running. So one last thing that I really wanted to mention about what you can do with eBPF in the cloud native world is just dive into this idea of process visibility. So we talked a bit about tools that can provide visibility into security events. This is a screenshot of something that we've been experimenting with in Cilium, where the idea is that you've already seen that we keep track of network flows and that we have a way of mapping network flows to Kubernetes identities. But we can also be aware of the process information. You saw in my Hello World example, we could see exactly what process, what executable was responsible for a particular event taking place. So if we tie those two things together, we can have awareness of the Kubernetes context. We can know which machine, which pod, which process generates, for example, a network flow. So in this screenshot, we've got an example of two perfectly legitimate looking network flows. But imagine that one of those arrows on the right-hand side goes to a cryptocurrency miner. You would be able to use this information to track back exactly what was responsible. You would have a ton of really valuable forensic evidence for figuring out how a cryptocurrency miner was running in your cluster, and some clues for how it got there, which could be hugely important. So eBPF makes the Linux kernel programmable, but it is not just about Linux anymore. There is eBPF for Windows on its way. There's obviously some things about eBPF that are sort of inherently tied into the Linux kernel data structures, but a lot of the concepts and a lot of the, particularly if we think about the interface between kernel, user space and kernel, or the way that networking happens, there's a lot of parallels between different operating systems. And the folks at Microsoft are essentially working on providing that kind of parallel eBPF implementation in Windows as well. So bringing this whole power of eBPF to observability and networking and security on Windows as well. So I've kind of rushed through that pretty quickly. So I hope you're going to have a ton of questions. But if you do have the desire to get really more embedded into eBPF and learn more about it, we have an event happening next week, Wednesday and Thursday next week, online event. So we're not in the hybrid or real world yet, but I think this is going to be we've got a terrific lineup of folks, both building the eBPF technology itself, using it. We have sections on networking and observability and security, and we have what we believe is a world first in the first public eBPF capture the flag challenge next week. So come and join us, register for the eBPF Summit, and I think there's going to be a lot of fun and a lot of learning happening at that event next week. So thank you very much. I'm going to have a quick look at I haven't had the comments, so if I take a look at the comments, I can see whether or not people have been able to hear a word I've said.
I'm very much looking forward to this CTF next week. It's and after our talk list as well, I think I'm going to have to explain to Andy that I'm just going to be doing some dev work tomorrow.
Well, it's kind of 2 half days, and relatively for us in the UK, it's starting at 5 p.m. So it's not even practically in your working hours.
Yeah. Oh well, it's tomorrow. I'm getting started. I've been meaning to look deeper into this. So thank you.
Oh, I
so
see.
much for your talk. It's just it's awesome. Oh, Matt, I think
You're on
you're
mute.
muted. Yeah.
Sorry. Question from Russell, Liz. Do you know of any good places to learn about all the K probes you can attach to?
Yeah, so the website ebpf.io, it is a community site. It's actually part of what the eBPF Foundation is kind of becoming the thing that runs it. And there's a ton of really good documentation on that site. I don't believe that there is an enumeration of all of the possible places that you can hook into. And like a lot of things in the world of the kernel, to get a definitive answer, you kind of need to go and look at the source code. I actually was looking into the range of different types of BPF program and the types of places they could be attached to, thinking about whether there would be an interesting talk that I could build around that. Some of those hook points are really you can get pretty into some esoteric networking functionality pretty quickly. So some of them are really very obviously useful. Some of them you kind of get into quite in-depth hook points. I hope that's the question.
Another question here. Is the eBPF code sandboxed in any way?
Yes, so this is a great question. And actually, Andy earlier on mentioned the eBPF verifier. So when you compile your C code and then you load it into the kernel, at the point where you load it in, it actually gets run through a verifying step. And that verifying is making sure that it's safe to run, because you really don't want anything crashing in the kernel. That would be a bad day. So the verifier is checking for things like, is there any possibility there can be a null pointer dereference? Is there any possibility that there can be an infinite loop? Making sure that the memory accesses are safe. And you can have some fun and games trying to persuade the verifier that what you want to do is legitimate. So that is the main sort of sandboxing capability. And in particular, making sure that you can only access safe memory. Now, there are some really interesting security issues that have come up, particularly a really interesting Spectre-related one, where the essentially a bug in the verifier that was not anticipating the possible speculative execution of a command that could end up loading an unsafe piece of memory, essentially, which has now been fixed. But the sort of intellectual challenge of how do you prevent these kind of like secure, insecure memory access is pretty interesting, pretty fascinating. Another thing that I've mentioned sort of related to this is how eBPF programs, because you can load them on the fly, you don't need to rebuild your kernel. There are instances where kernel vulnerability can be patched using an eBPF program. And there was a good example of I think it's called Packet of Death. So a bug in the kernel that would, I think it was some zero length field that wasn't handled properly that would result in a crash. So if you sent this particularly crafted packet with this particular zero length field, you could crash the kernel. With eBPF, the mitigation was to hook in at the what's called XDP, which is the point where you receive a network packet, and check for, is there this zero length field in the packet? If there is, we will modify it or throw the packet on the floor. I'm not quite sure which, but just making sure that you couldn't crash the kernel. So there have definitely been some security wins, as well as, like any code, there have been some vulnerabilities. And the short answer to, is it in a sandbox? Yes, it is, because of the verifier. I don't know if you're reading the question or if I am.
Yeah, I'm putting them on screen, but
okay. So great to have per node observability. So work for integrating data from multiple nodes within a cluster for tracing. Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the observability platforms are offering that kind of capability. Datadog, for example, I know are doing some work with eBPF. Pixie is bringing together, I'm pretty sure that's bringing things to, from multiple nodes. Cilium has, network observability across multiple nodes. You can view your network flows across the whole cluster and even multi-cluster. So yes, definitely. And I'm sure we'll see more and more tools in this area. Tricky questions. Does cgroups access hierarchy affect and restrict eBPF functionality? So there are some cgroup related programs that I'm not a huge expert in. I think that there are some places where you can hook eBPF programs that are completely, independent of cgroups, and there are some other ones that are cgroup dependent. I'm not an expert. Come to eBPF Summit next week and I'll help you find someone who is. Can commercial Linux providers limit eBPF capability, or is it inbuilt into the kernel so it's guaranteed to work with pretty much any major distro? Yeah, so over the last few years, really, that kernel support for eBPF has become more and more widespread. And today's kind of, I'm terrible at remembering exact numbers, but I want to say something like 4.18 or 4.19 is where eBPF started becoming a real thing. Most people are now running a 5. something kernel with pretty full eBPF support. So I think this is one of the reasons why now, the excitement about eBPF has got really, it's really happening now because people have access to that functionality in the kernels they're running in real life.
okay.
Can Python scripts be used instead of a C program? Right. So the program that you run in the kernel, at the point where you run it, is bytecode. So you need an assembler that can convert into BPF bytecode. And traditionally that's been written in C and compiled that way. You can handcraft it if you want to write the bytes. Rust now has support for compiling to BPF targets, so you can write that code in Rust. Really, it comes down to, do you have a compiler that can create that code? For the user space part, you can use whatever language you like. You just need to be able to access the system calls that allow you to load BPF programs and load what we call maps, which are the way we can share data between user space and kernel. These are good questions. Thank you, people.
I think that was about it on the questions there, Liz.
Oh no, there isn't. There's a really good one that we skipped over, and I love this question. This one is there anywhere we could learn about eBPF on a weekly basis from Russell W?
There you go.
I love that question because I every other week, and the other week is Duffy Cooley. We have an eBPF and Cilium office hours live stream every Friday, alternates between a US friendly time zone and a UK friendly time zone. So it almost stands for Echo, so we call it Echo. Come and join us in Echo. We have a lovely community. I've seen some familiar names on the chat here from our Echo community, so it's lovely to see you all.
Great. Okay, well, thank you again, Liz. That was absolutely brilliant. Let's just bring back all the rest of our lovely speakers for today.
Was this the eBPF launch event then? eBPF Foundation launch event today? Can we tag that with our Cloud Natives UK meetup?
Yeah, maybe we should. Yes, we could call it that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, we're really pleased. I mean, you can imagine with such giant companies involved, putting together the foundation has been, there's been quite a lot of work involved, and we are so pleased that we've been able to pull it together in time for the summit next week, which is really exciting.
Okay, well, so thank you to all of our fantastic speakers. Thank you to Liz. Thank you to Andy. Thank you to Paula. Thank you to Carla. Thank you to everybody who's joined on the stream, to all of our fantastic CNCF community groups who are involved in Cloud Natives UK. And we probably haven't talked enough about Kubernetes Community Days yet. So we should get one final plug in for Kubernetes Community Days UK. You can find all the details on the website at kcduk.io, which the schedule should be going live on the website in the next week or so. We can announce some of the fantastic keynote speakers today, including Gareth Rushgrove, Andy Martin's going to be there, Alexis Richardson is going to be there, Cheryl Hung is going to be there, Paula, help me out here.
Gareth Rushgrove.
And Curry's going to be there.
And Curry. There.
Yep.
David Mackay, Peter White.
Daniel Flanagan.
Rory McCune.
Yeah, fantastic. So please do check out the website, register for the event, connect with your local meetup group about watch parties. We hope to see many, many of you there. And I guess that is... Lewis, I'll pass over to you.
Oh, no. It was just the cost. Have we gone through the cost of the event?
The cost is zero. It's fantastic. It's literally zero. And if you register, not only can you come to the event for zero cost, but you're going to get a fantastic swag bag sent out to you in the post with loads of great freebies from all of our lovely sponsors. And any money that's left over after the event is going to be donated to charity.
I wish I was sat down for that announcement, but yeah, no, it's really looking forward to it, and it's only a month away. And we've got some other great events lined up as well for later this year with next week, and yeah, so excited for all this.
So on that note, thank you, folks, and we will see you all soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.